Most of us think we've got a handle on what literacy means. It's reading and writing. Simple as that, right? Well, what if I told you that definition isn't just a little old-fashioned, it's actually dangerously out of date? We're going to dig into why our whole idea of literacy needs a serious upgrade for the world we live in today.
Now really, just think about it for a second. What was the most important text you interacted with today? Was it a YouTube tutorial? An infographic on social media? Maybe it was the immersive world of a video game? This question, right here, is at the absolute heart of what we're talking about. We're here to smash those old boundaries of what we even call a text and figure out what being literate truly means right now. And this lays out the shift perfectly. Literacy, back then, was, a pretty solitary thing. One person, one static printed book. But literacy now? Oh, it's a completely different ballgame. It's interactive, it's social, it's a full-on sensory experience. We're constantly swimming in a mix of images, sounds, and words, often creating and sharing stuff together in these massive online communities. The whole game has changed.
So how in the world do we navigate this new, buzzing, collaborative landscape? Well, the first big step is to get that literacy isn't just some private skill you learn all by yourself, it's a social practice. It's all about using a shared set of symbols, and that could be words or images or even sounds, to show you're part of a particular group. This brings us to a super important idea: discourses. Honestly, the best way to think about a discourse is like an identity kit. It's not just the words you say, but how you say them, plus the images you use, the way you act, the stuff you believe in, all to signal that you belong to a specific crew. Being truly literate today means you can switch between a bunch of different discourses. From the formal language you'd use in a college paper, to the emoji-filled shorthand of your group chat, to the super specific lingo of your online gaming squad.
And this is where this idea of discourses gets really, really critical. There was this landmark study by Shirley Bryce Heath, and what she found was that kids whose discourse at home didn't line up with the formal discourse of their school often ended up at a huge disadvantage. And look, this has nothing to do with how smart they are. It's all about a mismatch in the rules of the game, a gap between how a kid learns to talk and think about the world at home versus how they're expected to do it in the classroom.
So, if some discourses get valued way more than others, like in a school setting, that leads us to a pretty heavy conclusion. Because literacy is social, it's never neutral. Not ever. It is always, always tied to power.
To really get this, let's jump in a time machine back to the 16th century. Imagine you're the Inca Emperor Atahualpa, and for the very first time in your life, you're looking at a book. This quote just captures that feeling perfectly. If you're from a culture that doesn't have alphabetic writing, all those little marks on a page, yeah, they could totally look like a swarm of ants. It was a completely alien piece of technology. And this moment, this massive cultural misunderstanding, it had utterly devastating consequences. When a Spanish priest hands Atahualpa a Bible, the emperor, he checks it out, finds it totally silent and meaningless, and just lets it fall to the ground. The Spanish immediately used that act, that so-called failure to recognize their kind of literacy, as the justification they needed to attack and capture him.
So you see, for the Inca, the written word didn't arrive as some amazing, enlightening gift. It showed up as a weapon, a brutal imposition that was used to justify violence and conquest. It's just a raw, powerful reminder that one group's definition of literacy can be used to completely dominate another.
But here's the thing. The Inca were not illiterate, not by a long shot. They had the quipu, this unbelievably sophisticated system of knotted chords. It was a multidimensional, totally sensory way to communicate that stored information through touch and color and patterns. It was a whole different kind of literacy, one the Spanish either couldn't or just wouldn't recognize. The quipu, with its use of touch and color and space, is actually the perfect bridge to our third big idea. Just like that ancient system, literacy today is fundamentally multimodal. It has blown way, way past just being about words on a page.
The texts we interact with now are a blend of all these different modes of meaning. Of course, you have the linguistic, that's the words. Then you have the visual, which is all about images and layout. You've got audio, everything from sound effects to a voiceover. There's gestural, like body language you'd see in a video, and even spatial, which is all about how things are arranged on a screen or in a room.
So, the most essential skill for this new multimodal world has a bit of a fancy name, transmediation. But put simply, it's just the process of taking an idea from one mode and expressing it in another, like turning the words of a poem into the images and sounds of a video. But here's the key. It is not a copy-paste job. It's a transformation. You're creating whole new layers of meaning in the process.
Here's a perfect, practical example. A student starts by handwriting a poem. Okay, that's the linguistic mode. Then they create some cool digital art to go with it. Now we're in the visual mode. Next, they record themselves reading the poem out loud, adding the audio mode. And when they mix all of that together into one video file, bam, they've just performed transmediation and created a rich, layered, multimodal text.
So when you start combining all these modes, the visual, the audio, the gestural, you realize that literacy is no longer just some quiet intellectual thing. It's a full-body sensory experience. And that brings us to our final and maybe most crucial point.
Okay, get ready for this, because this statistic is wild. Back in the 1800s, the average person traveled only about 50 meters a day. Today, thanks to cars and trains and planes, that number is closer to 50 times kilometers. That is a 1,000 times increase in how mobile we are.
So that just begs the question, doesn't it? If our actual physical lives have become so incredibly mobile, why do we so often cling to this static, old-school, page-bound definition of what it means to be literate? Our texts live on phones we carry everywhere. Our literacy needs to be just as dynamic and mobile as we are.
What this really means is that literacy isn't just happening in our minds anymore. It's an embodied experience. It's in our bodies. I mean, think about that kinetic feeling of movement when a student films from their point of view while going down a slide, or even just the simple touch and vibration you get from your phone screen. Modern literacy isn't just something you see or read. It's something you actually feel with all your senses.
And this brings us back to this really powerful original idea. The word aesthetic actually comes from the Greek word aesthesis, which just means perception from the senses. See, it wasn't originally about what's beautiful or what's art. It was about any experience that you perceive through your senses. And that is exactly what modern literacy has become, a full sensory engagement with the world.
And so that leaves us with this one last question to chew on. We've pretty much democratized the tools to create and share these powerful multimodal texts, right? Anyone with a smartphone can now be a creator. But as that story of Atahualpa reminds us, literacy has always been tied to power. So as we redefine what it means to be literate in this new age, the most important question isn't about the tech, it's about us. Are we actually building a world where that power is truly shared? Thanks for watching.